Hello everyone, we have reached the fourth and final video series for the semester focused on structural advice. So as we already discussed in class and you're aware, instead of doing an essay for this final assignment, it's going to be taking place in the form of a presentation. But that being said, we still have structural requirements that are very similar to the things we've been looking on with the essays this semester, and you're still going to be doing research analysis like you have for the last two papers. So there's a lot that's to be expected, and that should be something that's pretty comfortable for you at this point, but the end result will be a little bit different. Instead of a paper, it's going to be presentational in form. So we always begin with our questions. The first question I have for you guys, or the main one, is why are we arguing Smith? And I kind of have two motivations for this assignment. The first one is that, as we know, she's an arguer, right? We talked about her really complex argument against Mark Zuckerberg and social media and Facebook. We've talked about different arguments that she has tied to a lot of topics that you're going to be researching. So now that we know that something that a successful and professional academic writer should be doing is arguing, this is something I want to make sure that you are comfortable in doing. And so that goes into the second reason why we argue her, is that this session's goal is about crafting a critical response to the different things that you're reading and investigating, not only in this class, but just kind of, for yourself in general. This should be a goal, especially as you're in college. The goal is not to merely agree with the things that you're reading and researching. It's not merely to memorize them, but it's to think about your individual response. And so that's a big part of the mission for this paper. Is there research for this paper? Yes, as I mentioned, there definitely is. Just like there was with your papers, you're looking at academic insight. So I do want very clearly to get your personal response, but I also want to know that your response is tied to broader cultural elements, which requires you to be doing some research investigation as well. So here we go, we have our structure. As you can see, very similar to what we would expect with one of your essays. We have the introduction, which should include a story recap, an establishing of your interest, a little bit of a breakdown of Smith's theory for the story you've chosen, and then of course your thesis. Then we have the body, which should include both research and a tie back to Smith. You're going to have 3 points of support for your response to her, and you're going to look at an extended example. And then for the conclusion, of course, as usual, you're not just summarizing what you've already said, but you are giving us some final thoughts on this story and this bigger topic, and looking at the bigger picture as well. So let's begin this first video, or conclude this first video rather, by looking at the expectations for the introduction. So the first thing I'm asking for is a story recap, which basically all I'm asking is for you to give just maybe, a 15-20 second summary of the story, that also is giving us a little bit of your interest. So don't feel like you need to give a full plot description. It's going to take way too long. We've already read these. We just need a little bit of context, since some of them were from the beginning of the session and there's been a lot that's happened since then. Your interest, as I mentioned, is another big part of this section. As we know, a big part of this class is to investigate a personal dimension tied to the different topics that you're writing about, and so this is definitely a part of this assignment as well. You should also include in the introduction a little bit of a theory breakdown for Smith, and I'll show you this in the model, but basically the question you should be answering is, what is Smith's main point in the piece? And then you should be giving us examples to support your suggestion. So this is before you've even agreed or disagreed with her. All you're saying is, this is her main point in this essay, and let me show you how I know that that is her main point. So let's look at this in the model that's on the student page, or the class page. So as you know, the focus for this example was on Zadie Smith and Dead Man Laughing. And so just going over how this looks in the presentation, there's a slide just to remind me, okay, I'm going to do a brief recap of the story. There we go. Why this story? Again, I'm not going to explain too much about it, but key points there just to remind myself of what I want to explain there. The theory you should definitely be able to put down in words, right? And what I did was I came up with 3 examples that I used to say this is how I know this is her theory, right? So I'm saying her theory is comedy unites people, and how do I know this is her theory? The first way she shows me this is through the father and daughter connection. And again, I chose to include specific quotes. You don't have to necessarily put them on the screen, but just remind us in the story, how do we see this, right? Again, comedy unites people. What's another way I know this is her main point? Here we go. I get a quote, right? And then the third one, how do I know that this is what she actually believes from the essay? Here we go. So as I was mentioning, for this particular portion, it's not so much about giving my agreement or disagreement with her statement yet. All I'm doing is saying, this is her statement, this is her argument, and here are some specific ways I know that this is what she believes. So let's get into the next slide in a moment, in which we're going to talk about giving your response in the form of your thesis. To be continued.